My Lords, it is very difficult, in fact impossible really, for me to add meaningfully at this stage to the many tributes, personal and emotional tributes, that have been paid by noble lords to the late Baroness Lady Randerson. I knew her since I entered the House, but only rather distantly as a figure who spoke authoritatively and compellingly from the Liberal Democrat benches on the subject of transport. But over the last few months, as I've taken on this role, I have had the opportunity of getting to know her better, and indeed, if I may say so, developing a degree of affection for her rather shrewd sense of humour over that period. Others know her a great deal better than I ever achieved, and I regret that I shan't have the opportunity to develop that personal regard that was growing, that I had for her. We shall miss her very much. I'd like also to thank the noble lord and his officials for the time that they have given to briefing me on this bill. And I wish to thank all noble lords who've spoken in this debate. My lords, turning to the bill itself, I had a message from a foreign friend over Christmas asking me what it was like living in the socialist paradise, which led me to reflect a little bit on the nature of the government. And what strikes me about the government, and it's present here again, is not really its socialism, though there's a degree of that. It's the fact that this is a government that is almost solely focused, utterly focused, on the public sector. The public sector is the solution to everything. And of course, the policies of the public sector unions are determinative. And so it is that we come to this essentially public sector bill that is fundamentally driven by a rather narrow ideological approach. It is statist, it is anti-enterprise. It is also mildly nostalgic and backward-looking. It's a sort of return to the Attlee government, is essentially what we're being offered today. Now, our first objection to the bill, therefore, is that it is bureaucratic, it is anti-enterprise, and through franchising, it is likely effectively to snuff out a number of private sector businesses, which will be reduced to becoming not entrepreneurial entities at all, but merely agencies of the state operating to a fee and doing what the state instructs it to in terms of routes and services, and charging the fares that the state, through the local transport authorities, has set for it. Now, the noble lord himself knows from his time as the owner of a private bus company the benefits to passenger service of private businesses. The noble Lord Snape, and my noble friend Lord Maclauchlan drew attention to the decline in passenger numbers, and the implication that certain noble lords appear to draw from that is that it is a consequence of private provision. The same noble lords, however, do not give credit to the private sector for the very large, the massive increase in usage of railways under privatisation. And I think in that case they're probably right as well to some degree, because the point is that both bus demand and rail demand are subject to stronger fundamental forces. And that is the fundamental problem that the government has in trying to revive the sort of 1950s vision of bus services that we see in this bill. The fact is that in the case of rail, they hope to benefit from a secular rise in demand for rail passenger services. In the case of buses, they can only hope to prop up what is in fact a secular fall, a decline in demand for for bus services. And that is, a number of noble lords have pointed this out, That is very expensive indeed to do. And the noble Lord Snape gave some illustrations of how expensive, in fact, that might be. If we take as an example, and it's random, I mean, many examples were developed, but one of the first examples given in debate was given by the noble Baroness Lady Pigeon, when she referred to North Shropshire and the cuts in services that have been seen there. Does anyone really imagine that those cuts can be reversed and restored without very heavy public expenditure? The government's chosen case studies, which they're so proud of, include London and Manchester. The former Secretary of State, Louise Haigh, wrote in the Sunday Mirror about London. This is going back to November 2024, shortly before her political demise. This represents record capital investment to the majority of places and a once-in-a-generation reform plan that aims to deliver London-style buses to every corner of the country. Every corner of the country, including those that are usually overlooked. Now, my lords, as has been pointed out by the noble Lord Snape, though I think he actually we're roughly in the same ballpark, where he said £850 million a year to sustain London buses. Figure I have was £738 million a year in 2024. But we're in, as the Americans say, we're in the same ballpark. And if I may be so bold as to disagree with such an experienced transport commentator as my noble friend Lord McLaughlin, there has in fact been a reduction in bus mileage in London under the current mayor of approximately 5%. There was a plan to reduce it by 7%. I don't think the full 7% was delivered, but it certainly of the order of 5%. And this is very palpable to those of us who live in or close to central London in particular. In the case of Manchester, the B network celebrated its first year of franchised bus services in September 2024. Passenger journeys in Greater Manchester grew by 5% in the first year of franchising. By contrast, however, in the year ending March 2024, and I agree this is not exactly the same period, but it's the best overlap I can get, in the year ending March 2024, national bus passenger numbers grew by 7%, and those figures are taken from the Department of Transport official statistics. And might I say also, in the context of secular decline, that also illustrates how little can be learned from simply comparing from simply looking at 1 year's figures. So the idea that Manchester demonstrates a huge success, outstanding, apart from the rest of the country, because of franchising, needs to be substantiated. It's not actually necessarily very persuasive on the numbers given. And as my noble friend, the Earl of Effingham, pointed out, the establishment of the Greater Manchester B network required over £1 billion of central government investment. Now, if you're spending the thick end of £1 billion a year sustaining the London bus network, you might regard a one-off payment of £1 billion to Manchester as mere small change. But replicate that round the country, and you will eventually be looking at real numbers. The upshot is that any promise by the government to give London-style bus services to the whole of the country is essentially a chimera. It is a bogus offer that the government cannot afford to deliver. Let's turn briefly, if we may, to passengers, which is my next topic, if we move away from costs. We argued forcefully when we debated the government's passenger railway services public ownership bill, that the focus of the bill, the purpose of the bill, its overriding purpose, should be to improve passenger services. It was after all, a bill, it is now an act, about passenger services on the railways. And similarly, this bill, however, the government resisted that, and they overturned that in the Commons, in the other place. But similarly, this bill makes no commitment to an improvement in services for bus passengers. It simply hopes that by making structural and procurement changes, it will somehow achieve it. It has no overall duty on the Secretary of State to seek to improve passenger services. It simply says that perhaps it should. Is it going to work? Is the bill going to work? In the its manifesto, the Labour Party committed to reforming the system for procuring bus services and committing to give local leaders new powers. The reality of this bill is that the government isn't really giving local leaders new powers. It's simply removing the Department for Transport's role in confirming the appropriateness of franchising in other areas. It is our view that the government's decision to remove the Secretary of State's discretionary power to grant franchising powers to local authority risks too much. And we believe that the Secretary of State should have the power to intervene where a local authority's franchising model is failing, as a safeguard to protect services for local people where local leadership is poor. It is essential, my lords, to understand the differences between large concentrations of persons living in an urban area and the structure of a market that exists in rural areas. And that was the logic behind the 2017 Act, which gave powers to certain conurbations, effectively, to franchise or to take more control of their own buses, but to deny them elsewhere. And extending that power throughout the whole country is, I'm afraid, to take a chance and to offer a bogus perspective to the public. The vast majority of local transport areas, authorities, will not have the skills to plan routes, to assess demand, to set fares, and to introduce a ticketing system. No doubt we'll be told that the Bus Centre for Excellence will be deployed to help them. Perhaps the noble lord could tell us when he responds how many people are employed by the Centre for Bus Excellence. And as other noble lords have said, the consequence of this is that this bill has no answer for the needs of rural communities. We do believe that there are some subsidiary elements of this bill that are welcome, for example, closing the loophole on the safeguarding of children who are using or are being transported to school on independent school bus services. But we do have other concerns, which I will briefly run through because we'll have an opportunity to discuss them further in committee. The first is the relative silence of the bill on ticketing is remarkable. As the noble Baroness Lady Brinton, who is always ahead of the game, said to the rather older members of the House, perhaps, Oyster cards are not where it's at anymore. And I think contactless payment, at the very least, is what one should be looking at, rather than a bespoke Oyster card type system. But it is remarkable how little the bill has to say about that, and about, as she said, the ability to deploy that payment method outside one particular local transport area. Where is the bill taking us on that? What does the government have in mind? Data collection is very, very important, but more important than data collection is its dissemination. In London, the data collected by Transport for London is available free to all app developers. Is it the government's intention that that should be the case with the data collected nationally, or is it, heaven forfend, the secret plan of the Department for Transport to develop their own app to disseminate this on an exclusive basis? I think we would like to know. The training of bus drivers in relation to disability in particular is very important, but I am concerned, and the noble Lord the Minister knows that I have expressed this to him already privately. I am concerned about the implications of the passage in the bill which relates to drivers being trained to tackle antisocial behaviour and potentially violent activity. It is, in my view, it's my very clear view, and I suspect it is on reflection the noble Lord's view, that it is not right to expect, or for the public to expect, bus drivers to put themselves at risk to confront incidents that the police would tackle by deploying 2, 3 or 4 uniformed officers. I think we have to be very realistic about this, and we will want to explore this when the bill is in committee. Safety, of course, is terribly important, as the noble Lord, Lord Hampton, made clear. And I think it is worth asking the question to what extent the franchise model contributes to a sort of aggressive bus management that might lead to buses being driven less safely than might otherwise be the case. I said earlier that the bill had a sort of nostalgic back to Attlee flavour to it. One way of illustrating that is that it completely fails to mention anything to do with demand-led transport. It's very much a fixed route type traditional bus service that the bill envisages. But in fact, in many rural areas, demand-led transport might well be, and is already proving to be, a much more effective way of providing affordable services to communities. And the bill, as it stands, contains almost no provision for that and no reference. And it will be hard to see how that fits. It will be interesting to see how that fits with the franchising system. My Lords, I'll conclude. This is an ideologically driven, backward-looking, bureaucratic and expensive bill. We, for our part, on these benches, shall do our best to improve it.